The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is a tragic story involving the mass killing of 3 children. Mom did it, but there are a lot of people coming to her support. Here's the story. Duxbury, Massachusetts, a quiet seaside town, was shattered by an unthinkable tragedy. Lindsay Clancy, a young nurse, devoted wife, and mother of 3, was seen as the picture of perfection. But police say behind the smiles and family photos, darkness took hold. On a cold January night, investigators say she strangled her children, Cora, Dawson, and baby Callan. All that before attempting to take her own life. Clancy's husband, Patrick, returned home to a scene of unimaginable horror. Now, the once trusted nurse faces murder charges as her defense claims she suffered from severe postpartum psychosis. Prosecutors call it calculated. Her attorneys say it's a symptom of a mind lost to illness. Tonight, the question tears through this small town. Was Lindsay Clancy a monster or a mother broken beyond repair? Difficult situation, difficult trial, difficult case. This is far from open and shut. So let's begin here. The response to the scene. You're going to hear from the prosecutor describe what they believe happened here, beginning with the husband, the father coming home, and then emergency workers responding. Take a listen.
Patrick can be heard on the 911 call entering the home and heading to the basement. At one point, he calls out, "Guys." He can then be heard screaming in agony and shock as he found his children. His screams seem to get louder and more agonized as the time passes. Cora and Callan were on the floor in the den area of the finished basement, which is to the left when you walk down the stairs, while Dawson was alone on the floor in his father's home office, which is to the right when you go down the stairs. Each child still had the exercise band that was used to strangle them tied around their necks when their father found them. Dawson and Callan were face down on the floor. Cora was on her side with her torso turned towards the floor. He removed the bands and begged them to breathe. He continued to scream uncontrollably and screamed for officers to come to the basement. The dispatchers are hearing this and they send help down to the basement, and when they encounter Patrick, he yells out, "She killed the kids."
I don't think anyone can imagine this scene. Brings us to the first question in our investigation. What happened? What happened here? Let's bring in some guests who will help us work through this. Joining us, registered nurse Kim Whalen. She's also known as Nurse Kim on TikTok and on YouTube. And criminal defense attorney Dwayne Cates. Great to have you both here. I think this is a difficult case to talk about for everyone. It's a incredible tragedy across the board. But before we start our discussion, I just want to give the folks at home a little more information as we listen to the prosecutor lay out some of what they believe happened here.
On the morning of Tuesday, January 24th, 2023, the defendant took her 5-year-old daughter, Cora, to the pediatrician's for an appointment. She interacted with a receptionist, nursing staff, and a doctor. There were apparently no issues with the defendant's demeanor or behavior as she completed the appointment and was allowed to leave with Cora without any issues or concerns. When she returned home, she went outside with Cora and her 3-year-old son, Dawson, to play in the snow. They built a snowman. The defendant sent photos to her mother and to the defendant, to her husband, She texted with them. Nothing in the text was out of the ordinary or any sign of any distress or trouble. Back inside later that day at 4:02 p.m., the defendant searched on her phone Kids Miralax. She then searched that Takeout 3V via her cell phone at 4:13 p.m. Immediately after doing that, she used Apple Maps on her phone to determine how long it would take someone to drive from her home in Duxbury to 3V restaurant in Plymouth. So she would know how long someone would be gone if they ran that errand. She next went on the CVS website at 4:47 p.m. and then called CVS on Summer Street in Kingston. She spoke to the manager of CVS and asked if they had the Kids Miralax. The manager told her no, but they had other similar medications. According to the manager of CVS, her voice did not sound slurred or impaired in any way. She had no trouble understanding the defendant, and it was a perfectly normal conversation. At 4:53 p.m., the defendant texted her husband, who was working in his home office in their basement. She texted, "Any chance you want to do takeout from 3V? I didn't cook anything. It's been a long day." This was an unusual request, as when the family ordered takeout, they'd usually go somewhere closer to home, but it was a place that they had been in the past. Patrick Clancy texted back yes, and then the defendant asked him to check the menu. At 5:06 p.m., the husband texted the defendant asking what she was going to get. She responded, "A Mediterranean power bowl." She spelled it correctly, and it was something that was on the menu. He then told her that he wanted the scallop and pork belly risotto. At 5:10 p.m., the defendant called 3V Restaurant to place the order. She got the order correct. She gave the correct name for pickup, Patrick. The hostess who took the call said there was nothing out of the ordinary about this call. She was able to understand the defendant, that her voice was not slurred or impaired in any way. At 5:15 p.m., Patrick Clancy headed out the door to run these errands at the defendant's request. As he left, she texted him Pedialyte liquid stool softener. Surveillance footage shows Mr. Clancy at CVS on Summer Street in Kingston at 5:32 p.m. He goes to the medication aisle, the children's medication aisle. Phone records show that he called the defendant at 5:33 p.m. and she did not answer the phone. She then calls him back at 5:34 p.m. and the call lasted 14 seconds. He's there at the store unsure of which medication to get, and she tells him exactly what she wants. He had no issues communicating with her. It was a completely normal call, although he did mention that she seemed like she was in the middle of something. He is on surveillance footage during this time, exiting that aisle and appeared to be using his phone. He then heads to the register, makes his purchase, and leaves the store at 5:37 p.m. He's next seen on footage at 3V Restaurant at 5:54 p.m. He picks up the food and he's out of there within a minute. When he arrives home, the first thing he noticed was the silence. He did not see or hear the defendant or the children. He actually called her cell phone at 6:09 p.m. looking for them, and she did not answer. He went to their bedroom on the second floor and the door was locked. He was able to open it, and when he looked inside, he saw blood on the floor in front of a full-length mirror and the window open. He immediately runs downstairs and into the backyard, where he finds the defendant laying on the ground. She appeared to have cuts on her wrists and neck, but he stated to 911 that those wounds were no longer bleeding. She was conscious. He called 911. During this time, he asked the defendant, "What did you do?" She responded to him, "I tried to kill myself and jumped out the window." During the 911 call, Patrick can be heard asking the defendant, "Where are the kids?" He later told police that she replied, "In the basement." So immediately after this happened, she knew what she had done and she knew where the kids were.
Okay, Kim, let's go through this. It seems like she is planning this out. It seems that she has the appearance of being lucid, of being aware of what's going on, and takes care of the kids first, then jumps out of the window. What are you seeing happening here?
Yes, unfortunately, Vinny, that is what it appears. An unthinkable tragedy in Duxbury, Massachusetts. And I can't imagine her husband, Patrick, returning to that scene, to Cora, Dawson, and baby Callan. Now, yes, it appears there was a plot or a organized effort for him to go out and to get food that was not a regular request. And then it is very concerning that when she is answering the phone upon being called at CVS regarding the Miralax for the children, that she was appearing to be in the middle of something. And that would likely have been when her children were no longer going to be on this earth any longer. So, there is a lot to unpack here of what was happening. Was there any auditory hallucinations? Even though she was able to have proper speech patterns, that could have been something that she was dealing with in a short period of time that could have caused this if it was truly a postpartum psychosis, which is only rare and affects 1 to 2 women out of 1,000.
Dwayne Cates, if you look at it on paper, right, before you pull back those layers, like Nurse Kim is talking about, pulling back the layers, if you're just looking at what happened here, this looks like, I hate to say ordinary, not ordinary, but like a standard. We've seen this with families before, a murder-suicide situation. And this is one that seems to have some level of planning to it all to get the husband out of the house.
Yeah, and unfortunately for her, trials and criminal cases are about what things look like, some more than what they really are, because some of these things could be coincidences, but when you lay it out the way the prosecutor laid it out, it's pretty damning. But again, that still doesn't rule out a psychotic break, from postpartum depression. I mean, number one, normally sane people don't do this. So there's clearly a psychotic episode that happened. Is it something that could be used for her defense? We'll have to see what the experts say.
Yeah, Kim, the level of tragedy here is so deep. But the victims are all young, super young, innocent, loving, attached to their mom, I'm sure, like all the time. That's what kids do. They just cling to their moms, and for good reason, right? For good reason. And there's some level of this trust being broken. I'm really troubled, though, by getting him out of the house, and then, but at some point, if you're planning this, you're going to realize that he's going to come home to this. And it seemed like the plan was to come home to 4 dead bodies.
Yeah, that is what it appears, Vinny, that the end goal was not only for the children or whatever had taken over and command. Sometimes you have command hallucinations. And Lindsay also did leap from a second floor window and has resulted in she's paralyzed and inpatient at Duxbury State Hospital since 2023. This is an unimaginable loss for a family, a community, and a bigger picture. As an RN, knows where to go and is aware of the signs, and it still was insidious and crept in and caused a tragedy that no one will forget.
Dwayne, and when we saw the court appearance, when we were watching the prosecutor detail everything, and we had that split screen up, that was a zoom from the hospital room where the defendant is. There she is. And she's paralyzed. The jury is going to see everything that happened to her, but she's still alive, and the 3 children aren't. What are your thoughts there about that, the end result? Like, able to kill the children, but not able to kill herself?
Well, and some of the reporting I heard was that she kind of hung and dropped. It wasn't like a full-fledged headfirst leap when she jumped out the window. So So was it a real suicide attempt or was it a feigned suicide attempt for sympathy? Nobody knows. And you know, again, this case is full of what are criminal defense attorneys call bad facts for Lindsay, because you know this really looks bad. I mean, the getting the husband to go run the errand and then killing the kids while he's gone is a bad fact.
Well, what we're going to do when we come back is do what Nurse Kim started to do, which is pull back the layers on this. Up next, what was going on inside the home?
She made a posting on Facebook about a month or so prior to this, indicating that she felt that she was anxious and depressed because of postpartum.
The Court TV podcast will return.
She's 32 years of age, Your Honor. She met her husband. He was the love of her life. They got married. A wonderful young couple. And as counsel noted, she always wanted to have kids. Always wanted to have babies. She's a nurse. She went to be a midwife because she wanted to help other women.
All that's true. All that is true. Let's peel back those layers right now and take a look at Lindsay's medications. This is from a search warrant. Patrick Clancy stated that Lindsay went to a psychiatrist who he identified as Jennifer Tufts and was prescribed Zoloft. Patrick Clancy stated that Lindsay also saw another psychiatrist who he identified as Rebecca Gelada. Patrick stated that Lindsay was also prescribed multiple other medications. You ready? Time to make a list here, including Valium, Trazodone, Ativan, Klonopin, Prozac, and Seroquel. Patrick stated that Lindsay would take as many as 4 medications a day. However, she would take them as prescribed. Patrick stated that Lindsay stated that she had been having suicidal thoughts as well as thoughts of hurting the children. Lindsay had self-admitted herself to McLean Hospital from January 1st of 2023 through January 5th of 2023. Then it was on the 23rd when all of this happened. Which brings us to the next question in our investigation. What was going on inside the home here? It seems that there is some level of acknowledgement of a problem. Back with us to help, registered nurse Kim Whalen, also known as Nurse Kim on TikTok and YouTube, and criminal defense attorney Dwayne Cates. That list of medications, Nurse Kim, what are your thoughts when you hear a list that long?
Yeah, I have concerns with a list that long, and especially with a mother with 3 babies. You know, it ranges from benzodiazepines to antipsychotic medication in Seroquel. And it also makes you have a little bit of a pause when you think about Lindsay self-referring and admitting to McLean's. This wasn't a Section 12 where she was taken from the community. She requested the help. And 5 days later, on the 5th, she is discharged to home with all of those medications and told that she's going to be getting better. Unfortunately, that did not occur. And we know the result that happened less than 2 weeks later.
Yeah, Dwayne, here's some more information from a search warrant. Patrick stated that he and Lindsay had an amazing marriage, got along great. He further stated that they tell each other that they love each other 10 times a day. Here's from a GoFundMe page. She loved being a nurse, but nothing matched her intense love for our kids and dedication to being a mother. It was all she ever wanted. The real Lindsay was generously loving and caring towards everyone, me, our kids, family, friends, and her patients. The very fibers of her soul are loving. So how important is this picture, and what picture does this tell, ultimately, to a jury?
Well, it tells the picture that what happened when she killed the children was not the normal Lindsay. I had several cases like this with a long list of medications where a psychopharmacologist that's knowledgeable about all these medications and their interactions with each other. And I've actually had cases dismissed because I was able to prove that the side effect interactions of the drugs matched exactly what happened in the crime. In other words, the side effects of the drugs caused the crime. And again, it sounds like she's a pretty normal person, and then she's taking all these drugs, and then all of a sudden she's got these suicidal ideations, homicidal ideations, checking herself into mental institutions. This is a case where you got to get a psychopharmacologist to look at all those drugs. And even though she was taking them as prescribed, if you take them as prescribed, but they have interactions with each other, that can be a really big problem. And I've seen it cause extremely bizarre behavior before.
Yeah, Kim, I go back to this. This is the part that strikes me, that she's communicating these thoughts that she's having beforehand. She's communicating these thoughts that she's having before she self-admits to McLean Hospital. And I'm trying, like, if someone is planning and plotting a murder, you're not telling everybody your plan and your plot. That's the problem I'm having right now, Kim.
Yeah, absolutely, Vinny. It just doesn't make sense. If you're trying to get help and you're trying to get better and you're noticing the change, you are seeing this, but I truly believe it's so sad that in the year 2023 or even now in 2025, that mothers that are experiencing this, either a postpartum baby blues, postpartum depression, or in the most extreme cases, postpartum psychosis, that you have a fear of a stigma attached to it. So when she went and was discharged from that mental hospitalization on the 5th of January, I think she just perhaps tried to pull herself up by her bootstraps. And as our other guest said, very important to look at the interactions of those psychiatric medications that she was placed upon when she was discharged.
All right, we're out of time for tonight in this segment, but Kim Whalen and Dwayne Cates, great to have you both here. Dwayne, great to catch up with you, and Kim, nice to see you again, talking about something different. We'll see you again both very, very soon. All right, still to come, what's Lindsay Clancy's defense?
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the shocking case of Lindsay Clancy and the 3 children she killed. The evidence is overwhelming, but a conviction may be difficult. Here's the story. They were the family everyone admired. Lindsay Clancy, a labor and delivery nurse, her husband Patrick, and their 3 bright, smiling children. But behind the closed doors of their Duxbury home, a mother's silent struggle with postpartum depression was spiraling towards tragedy. On a January night, prosecutors say Lindsay methodically planned her children's deaths, using exercise bands to strangle them before leaping from a window in an attempt to end her own life. In court, her defense paints a chilling picture of a woman lost in the fog of postpartum psychosis, over-medicated, unheard, and unraveling. The courtroom is divided between compassion and fury, faith and disbelief. As the case moves toward trial, one haunting question remains. How could love so pure end in something so devastating? It's a murder case. It'll be a murder trial. I want to take a moment here to listen to the prosecutor lay out their theory of this murder case.
The children were killed by ligature strangulation. Ligature strangulation causes the victim to become unconscious anywhere from 10 seconds up to a minute. The more the victim struggles, the longer it takes. After the victim is unconscious, the ligature must be held in place with force, squeezing the neck for up to an additional 4 to 5 minutes to cause death. Therefore, she had to strangle each of them to unconsciousness and then make sure the bands were squeezing their little necks for several minutes. She could have changed her mind at any point during that time and removed those bands from their necks, and she did not. The defendant did not take advantage of the situation when her husband left the home that night. She created the situation, and she used Apple Maps to make sure she would have enough time to strangle each child before her husband returned from where she had sent him. The defendant is a danger to herself and others. She planned these murders, gave herself the time and privacy needed to commit the murders, and then she strangled each child in the place where they should have felt the safest, at home with their mom. She did so with deliberate premeditation and extreme atrocity and cruelty.
You can hear the prosecutors is very clear on what their case is here against Lindsay Clancy. And that brings us to the next question in our investigation. It's about the other side. What's Lindsay Clancy's defense? What's the response, right? The evidence is overwhelming, by the way, for them to prove that, but there will be a defense here. Here to help answer that question is psychotherapist and CEO of Life Counseling Solutions, Dr. Janie Lacey, and Boston attorney, former prosecutor Catherine Loftus. She's also the host of Note My Objection podcast. Great to have you both here. Let's take a listen to Kevin Reddington. We've covered many of his trials through the years here on Court TV, going back decades here when I was a young correspondent for the network. Here he is kind of laying out what I believe is a big part of their case, some of the facts they believe help the defense.
They put her on a number of medications. They put her on Prozac, which Your Honor is well aware is what's known as SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Your Honor knows that along with some of these medications, they have the black box warning from the FDA. May cause suicidal ideation, may cause homicidal ideation. She was on Ativan. She was on Benadryl. And then she ended up being told, okay, because she was complaining about the effects of the Prozac, they said, stop the Prozac, we'll find something else. They put her on Remeron. Then they added on Seroquel. And Your Honor, I attached from David Benjamin, the toxicologist, some papers with the submission, and Your Honor can see the side effects that this Seroquel causes. She was having bad thoughts. She was having worsening depression. Her husband suffered through that phase. Her parents were well aware of the fact that she was suffering from this depression and depressive phase. She wasn't sleeping. This is a significant issue between the postpartum depression as well as possibility of postpartum psychosis that is pretty much ignored. But nevertheless, with the overlay of the SSRIs and the history, and Your Honor has some emails and things that people would reach out to me from all over the world indicating that their daughter had the same problem, that they had the same problem. Your Honor is well aware that many times when people are on Prozac or on SSRIs, workplace violence, homicides, family homicides. This is clearly a tragic, which is a word that's used too much in the criminal justice system, but this really is a tragedy, this case.
She's in a very surreal state. It feels dreamlike to her, as she's described to me on multiple occasions. And individuals who can present as being lucid and linear and clear thinking do not make those people not mentally ill. They have the capacity for, on occasion, to be able to do things that they've been doing for a long period of time. When you have delusional thinking, fixed beliefs that are unchangeable, and hallucinations, namely command hallucinations, telling you to do things that are malevolent, and you believe those voices that are telling you you need to follow what they say, that's when things go downhill.
Okay, Dr. Janie Lacey, I want to begin with you. Postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, the medications she was given, yet still appearing lucid and making decisions at the same time. What are your thoughts about all of those items in play?
My thoughts, Vinnie, about what you just mentioned is it's not necessarily abnormal. So when we think about postpartum psychosis, we know it's very rare for one, I have to say that, but it is a severe mental illness. And about 4% of people that are actually diagnosed with it actually commit homicide. But I do think it does confuse people because of exactly what you just mentioned. Is we look at it almost when we think about a lot of the mothers that we work with, a lot of times there is this, and we actually call it the smiling depression, because it's known as the smiling depression because many mothers try to put on that happy face, even when they're suffering and making detection difficult. But I think what I understand in this case is that there is documentation that she was reaching out to get help. And there was a lot of things that were missed in particular. And when you were sharing about the clip about the medication, 13 medications over a 4-month period of time, I mean, I could just understand that there would probably be some over medications, and I would understand why the defense would be looking at that, because a lot of times when things are not properly diagnosed, it cannot be properly treated. So if there was a proper diagnosis, there could be proper treatment, especially over that year period of time of her mental deterioration, Vinnie.
Okay, Catherine, how do all these issues that Dr. Janie Lacey has laid out manifest themselves inside the courtroom for the defense in this case?
Well, how it's going to look logistically is that the defense is going to put on basically a case that she's not criminally responsible. Obviously, everybody who's watching this case, the jurors who sit on this case are going to know ultimately the responsibility lies with Lindsay Clancy. There's no dispute as to that. Kevin Reddington has filed a notice of lack of criminal responsibility. Essentially what that claims is that she suffered from a mental illness or defect in which she substantially lacked the capacity to understand the criminality of what she was doing or to conform her actions with the law. And what that then does is it forces the burden on the Commonwealth, not only to prove that she is the person who committed these crimes, but also that she did have the capacity to understand what she was doing, because ultimately it will end in what kind of sentence does she get. You know, this is not a case in which she's going to be found not guilty and walk out of a courtroom likely ever. This is really a determination as to whether she serves her sentence in a state prison or in a mental health facility. And so that's how we are going to see the case actually play out at trial.
Now, let's listen to the prosecutor here, right? Because as Catherine pointed out, it's up to the prosecution now to prove that she was thinking clearly, knew what she was doing. Take a listen to this, Dr. Janie Lacey. I want to get your reaction to the prosecutor laying out what they believe the facts will show.
In the months, weeks, and days preceding January 24th, 2023, the defendant meticulously detailed her daily activities, her children's lives, her mental state, and her medication use. Her writing was clear, precise, and articulate. She never indicated that she was hallucinating, delusional, or had disordered thoughts or speech. In all of her writing, she appears to know who she is, where she is, the date, and with whom she's interacted. Using an erasable whiteboard because she was still temporarily intubated, one of the first questions that Lindsay Clancy asked was, "Do I need an attorney?" She knew that she had murdered her children, and she had the clarity, focus, and mental acumen to focus on protecting her own rights and interests. During this call, the defendant stated that after he left the house that night, she killed the kids because she heard a voice and had, quote, a moment of psychosis, end quote. He asked her what voices she heard, and she said she heard a man's voice telling her to kill the kids and kill herself because it was her last chance. Patrick Clancy told the police the defendant had never heard voices before. He also told the police the defendant had never used the word psychosis to him before.
All right, Dr. Janie Lacey, what are your thoughts here about allegations? First time she mentions hearing voices, is meticulously writing everything down, doesn't talk about hallucinations. Does that jive?
Well, it does, Vinnie. When we look at psychosis, there's usually, especially because she's had mental health services before. So I would be interested to see what those mental health professionals have documented, because hallucinations and delusions are one of our primary features when we consider the psychosis part of it. And then we would also be looking at, her mood swings, and her husband would probably be the one that can also talk about what we call mania, right? She's feeling high and overactive, and then a depression. But one of the other key things that we would be seeing, and I would imagine the prosecution is also looking at this, is that symptoms of psychosis, they typically begin 2 to 3 days to 2 weeks after childbirth, and they can appear up to, we would look at 12 weeks of postpartum. So it could be during that time period. But on the other hand, Vinnie, we also know that a lot of mothers don't talk about it because there's so much shame around some of the hallucinations or delusional thoughts that they have. And then, I would imagine either her husband or the mental health professionals can document. Did she talk about insomnia? Did she talk about confusion? Because sometimes confusion is delusion and it is hallucinations, but when clients come in, they will describe it as disorientation or they have difficulty remembering things. But that should all be documented because of the services that she received up to the year before the tragedy.
All right, let me ask you this, Catherine. If the jury believes that she was hearing a voice, and the voice said this is her last chance, is that enough? Does that meet the burden if the jury believes it? Is that enough to eliminate the criminal responsibility, keep her out of prison, and send her to an institution?
It may be, the question of criminal responsibility is a difficult one. It's a legal term, and there is no one definition that a attorney or a judge can present to a jury to say, if so-and-so is diagnosed with this specific disorder or psychosis, that means you must find them not criminally responsible. So it's really, some of this goes into sort of the gut feelings that jurors have, their own common sense, which they're often told to use, about motherhood, about what's happening, what's going on in somebody who's having a mental health crisis. And ultimately, like we said before, this is a tragedy. It's not going to bring, there's not going to be a resolution to this case, whether she's found to be criminally responsible or not. There's no real, sense of justice in a tragedy such as this. So it'll be interesting to see, but ultimately it will be sort of a gut call from the jury.
All right, guests are staying with us. Coming up next, how does Patrick Clancy move on?
This is the Court TV podcast.
Do you hope that a plea agreement could be reached? Would that be the best way to dispose of this case?
I certainly do. And I'm hoping that Tim Cruz, who's a former defense attorney and DA for a long time, would be able to understand this is just a tragic case that really should be resolved without the fanfare of a trial and the emotion.
That's Kevin Reddington, the attorney for Lindsay Clancy, saying, yeah, there should be a deal here. Hasn't happened. I want to put this on the screen. This is from an interview from the New Yorker magazine with Patrick Clancy, the husband, the father. Patrick said, I forgive my wife, and I do. I wasn't married to a monster. I was married to someone who got sick. Patrick Clancy's new apartment in Midtown Manhattan looks much like any other tidy bachelor pad. There's little on the living room walls. For months, he was consumed with the thought that nothing was left. He took a solo trip to Central America and then to Europe, staying in youth hostels to avoid the sight of vacationing families. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? That brings us to the next question in our investigation. It's about the dad. How does Patrick Clancy move on? How do you move on from this? Here to help, still with us, is psychotherapist, CEO of Life Counseling Solutions, Dr. Janie Lacey, and Boston attorney, former prosecutor Catherine Loftus, also the host of Note My Objection podcast. Dr. Janie, I'll begin with you. How does this dad, I still call him, he's a dad. Once you're a dad, you're always a dad. How does he move on?
Vinnie, this is a tough one. Patrick, his journey forward to me just represents just an extraordinary test of just human resilience and forgiveness in the face of what is unimaginable to any of us. But as he's choosing forgiveness over anger, as you just put up that quote that he wasn't married to a monster, right? That perspective just frames his what I would consider his entire approach to healing. Rather than harboring like any type of anger that we're seeing, he's choosing to view the tragedy through the lens of her mental illness. And from what I understand, he's maintaining connection with her. And even though he's physically relocated and started over, as you just mentioned, in his apartment, there's no house anymore. There's no kids. And that's all that's left. It's just him and Lindsay. And then I believe he was honoring his children's memory when he ran the Boston Marathon. So keeping their memory alive and turning that into purpose and action. And I believe he's also advocating for mental health awareness. So he's expressing and he's doing things to keep his children alive. He's, forgiving the unforgivable for most people. And he's living with complex emotions that we can't even imagine, right? But he's acknowledging being self-conscious about that emotional state, Vinny. So
and it's not even we can't imagine it. It's like we don't want to imagine it, right? We don't even want to go there. Before we run out of time, Catherine, what impact do you think the dad will have on the case, on the administration of justice here ultimately?
I imagine he would have a significant amount of impact on the jury. As he stated in his interview with the New Yorker, that he wasn't married to somebody who, was homicidal, who was hateful towards their children. He was married to a woman that he loved, was a professional, was hardworking, was a mom by who all accounts loved her children. And so I think that sort of presentation of who Lindsay Clancy was, not in this moment on this terrible night when she decided to take the lives of her children, but who she was, throughout their relationship will have quite a bit of an impact on the jury.
Dr. Janie Lace, we have about 30 seconds left here. Looking at his future, he's still young. Would it be a positive or a negative for him to start another family someday?
I think it can absolutely be a positive, but that would probably be after he really takes some time to grieve after the case is over, right? Because his story just challenges those conventional notions of just grief and forgiveness in the wake of a family tragedy. But I do believe, and we've seen it, people have found love again, and they've created something new without forgetting what has happened.
All right, and obviously we're staying on top of this story and this case as it gets ready for trial. Catherine Loftus, Dr. Janie Lacy, thank you both so much. Great to have you here. The only cases that come to mind in my history here at Court TV where a jury has found someone not guilty by reason of insanity, not finding them criminally responsible, are two cases involving two moms who committed mass killing of their own children. Andrea Yates and Deanna Laney claimed they were ordered by God and believed they were saving their children when they took their lives. So the question is, will this jury believe Lindsay Clancy didn't think she was doing something wrong when she took the lives of those three young children? I'm Vinnie Politan, and we'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues. There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.